My name is Solene Voss. I am 28 years old, and I have not walked through my family's front door in 5 years. Tonight, on Christmas Eve, I am sitting on a private flight to Aspen, Colorado, holding a handwritten card from my mother, and I already know that before this night is over, my father will say something that will make every person at that dinner table wish they had stayed quiet. Before I tell you what happened, I want to know where you are watching this from. Drop your city in the comments right now. And if you have ever been the one person at a family dinner that everyone underestimated, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to stay with you. Now let me take you back to that flight. The card from my mother said 7 words. Solene, we are having Christmas, please come. No apology, no explanation for 5 years of silence, just 7 words on a card with a printed snowflake in the corner. I held it for a long time before I decided to go, not because I was hopeful, not because I expected anything to be different. I went because I needed to see with my own eyes whether that house still had any power over me. My phone buzzed once before we landed. It was a message from my business partner, Bram Kowalski. Meridian closed. Bank will call tonight to confirm asset allocation. Be ready. I read it, put my phone in my coat pocket and looked out the window at the mountains below. Nobody on that plane knew what that message meant. Nobody at the dinner table that night would know either. Not yet. I arrived at the Aspen house just after 7 p.m. The driveway was full of cars. Through the windows I could see people holding wine glasses, dressed the way people dress when a dinner party is also a performance. My father, Gerard Voss, was already in position near the fireplace with a drink in his hand, talking to a man I recognized as Kaylan Whitmore, the financial advisor who had worked with my family for over 15 years. My mother, Nadine, came to the door. She looked relieved to see me the way someone looks relieved when they were not sure the person they invited would actually show up. She kissed my cheek and said, "You look well." That was it. No hug that lasted more than 2 seconds. No, I missed you. Just you look well, and then she turned to lead me inside. My brother Caius was standing near the back of the room. He saw me, nodded once and went back to his conversation. He did not come over. Within 30 minutes of my arrival, my father made his first comment. He was standing with a group of guests, people I did not know, and he said loudly enough for me to hear across the room, "Solene is still doing her little tech thing in Detroit. Startup life." He smiled when he said it. The people around him smiled back. Nobody asked me anything directly. A few minutes later, when a guest asked me what I did, my father answered before I could. He said, "She runs a small logistics company, very independent, always has been." He said independent, the way people say it when they mean stubborn and without much to show for it. I did not correct him. I took a sip of water and listened. Kaya still did not say anything. My phone was in my pocket, and I knew the bank would call before the night was over. I was not nervous. I was, if anything, curious about how the next few hours were going to unfold. 5 years before that Christmas dinner, I was sitting in a conference room at Ashford Industries in Cleveland. I was 23 years old, and I had spent 3 years building my way up to the position of head of product development, the youngest person in that role in the company's history. Richard Ashford sat at the head of the table. 4 board members sat along the sides. None of them made eye contact with me when I walked in. I knew before I sat down that the meeting was not going to go in my direction. Richard read from a prepared statement. He said the company was restructuring its product development division and that my position was being eliminated. He used the word eliminated, the way people use it when they want to make a decision sound inevitable rather than personal. There was an envelope on the table in front of me. He told me the terms of my departure were inside. I did not open the envelope in the room. I picked it up, stood up and left. I knew the real reason. 2 weeks earlier, I had challenged one of Richard's strategic decisions in a full management meeting. I presented data that showed his preferred direction would cost the company significant market share within 18 months. I was right, and I said so in front of everyone. That was the thing Richard Ashford could not forgive, not the disagreement itself, but the fact that it happened where other people could hear it. When I got back to Cleveland that evening, I called my father. I told him what had happened. He listened and then he said, "You should have known how to manage him better. Richard is the kind of person who can open doors for this family. You made an enemy when you did not have to." That was the last real conversation we had for a long time. The months that followed were hard in a specific way, not dramatic but grinding. I applied to more than 40 positions over 2 months. Some companies did not respond. Some invited me to interviews and then went silent. One recruiter told me plainly that my departure from Ashford was a flag on my record, that people in the Cleveland business community talked, and that Richard's version of events had gotten around. My savings were enough to last 6 months if I was careful. I was careful. I moved to a smaller apartment. I stopped buying things I did not need. I cooked almost every meal at home. At the 4-month mark, I took a temporary front desk position at a shared workspace facility in downtown Cleveland. The pay covered rent and groceries and not much else. I took the job because I needed the income and because sitting still was making things worse. Bram Kowalski came in on a Tuesday morning. He was 41 at the time and had built and sold 2 companies before this. He came in to rent a conference room for a presentation with potential investors. The projector system in the room failed 20 minutes before his guests were scheduled to arrive. I went in, diagnosed the connection issue, reconfigured the display settings, and ran through his slide deck twice to confirm everything was working before the investors walked through the door. After the meeting ended, Bram stopped at the front desk on his way out. He said, "Did you study engineering or computer science?" I told him I had studied business and product management, but that I had always been comfortable with technical systems. He asked me what I had done before this job. I told him the truth. We talked for 45 minutes. He asked specific questions about how I approached product decisions, how I handled disagreements with leadership, and what I thought had gone wrong at Ashford. I gave him honest answers. 2 weeks later, he called me and made an offer. He was in the early stages of building a platform that used artificial intelligence to forecast supply chain disruptions and route logistics solutions in real time. He needed someone who understood product development at a granular level and who could lead the team that would build it. He wanted me as a co-founder, not as an employee. I told him I would accept on one condition, that I had equal standing in product decisions from day one. He said yes. We moved the operation to Detroit, where overhead costs were lower, and the logistics infrastructure gave us direct access to the kind of companies we were building for. We called the company Gintra Corp. The first 18 months were relentless. We had a small team, a tight budget, and a product that needed to be proven before anyone would take it seriously. The first version launched 9 months in. Our first paying customer was a mid-sized logistics firm in Michigan, then 3 more, then a contract with a large regional distribution company. By the second year, Gintra had real revenue. By the third year, we expanded into Asian markets and signed our first European partnership. In year 4, a major investment fund valued the company at $8 billion. In year 5, we closed the Meridian deal, a strategic merger with one of the largest technology conglomerates in the supply chain space. When that deal closed, the total value of my accounts, including equity, investment funds, and liquid assets, reached $70 billion. That is the call I was waiting for on Christmas Eve. The card from my mother arrived in the first week of December. It came by mail, not by text or email, handwritten on a Christmas card with a printed snowflake border. "Solene, we are having Christmas at Aspen. Please come." I set it on my desk and looked at it every day for a week. Bram noticed it sitting there and asked if I was going. I told him I had not decided. He said, "You do not owe them your presence, but if you go, go because of your own reason, not theirs." I thought about that for several days. My own reason, not to prove anything, not to have a confrontation, not to wait for an apology that might never arrive in the form I expected. My reason was simpler and harder to explain. I wanted to know if that house still affected me the way it used to. I wanted to find out if I could sit at that table and feel steady. I called my mother in the second week of December and told her I would be there on the evening of the 24th. She said, "Good," and her voice had the specific quality of someone who had been anxious about the answer and was relieved it was not a no. She did not ask me anything about my life. I did not offer anything. I did not call my father to tell him I was coming. I packed one bag. I chose clothes that were simple and comfortable, nothing designed to make a statement. I asked my assistant to hold all non-urgent communications except for anything related to the Meridian closing. That was the one thing I was tracking. On the flight to Aspen, I was not rehearsing conversations or planning what I would say if anyone brought up certain topics. I was just sitting with the fact that I was going, and that was enough of a decision for now. The dinner table seated 16 people. My father had arranged the seating. I was placed near the far end. Kaylan Whitmore sat near my father at the head of the table, where he always sat at family events. It was a position that communicated something without words. The first course came out. Wine was poured. The conversations around the table moved through real estate in Aspen, investment portfolios, a ski trip someone had taken in January, the performance of a private equity fund that two of the guests had money in. I ate and listened and did not insert myself. My father looked down the table at me and said, loud enough for the 8 people nearest to him to hear clearly, "Solene, is your company still standing? I read that a lot of tech startups have been shutting down this quarter." There were a few polite sounds from people nearby that functioned as laughter. Before I could respond, Kaylan leaned forward slightly and asked, "What sector specifically? Software infrastructure or something else?" My father answered for me without pausing. He said, "Logistics software, small operation." Then he added, "She has always preferred to work alone, very independent, but sometimes knowing your limits is important too." He said it with a half smile, the kind that made the comment sound like fatherly observation rather than dismissal. Caius was sitting 3 seats away from me. He was looking at his plate. My mother said quietly, "Gerard," but she did not say anything after that. My father continued. He said, "I just think if something significant had happened, we would have heard about it. That is all I am saying." He picked up his wine glass. The table moved on. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked down at the screen under the edge of the table. The call was from First Continental Private Banking, the division that handled high-asset client accounts. I knew this call was coming. I had known since Bram's message landed. I excused myself from the table and stepped into the hallway. The call lasted 4 minutes. When I came back, I sat down, set my phone on the table with the screen facing up, and picked up my fork. My father looked at me and said, "Everything all right, important call." I put the fork down. I looked at him, then at Kaylan, then briefly around the table. I said, "First Continental Private Banking, called to confirm asset allocation following the close of the Meridian deal today. My accounts across all holdings currently total $70 billion. The table went completely silent. Not the polite silence of people pausing between topics. The full, involuntary silence of people who have heard something that has stopped the normal processing of the room. Kaylan set his fork down. His eyes moved to me with a different kind of attention than they had carried all evening. He said carefully, "You said Gintra Corp." I said yes. He had read about Gintra. The Meridian deal had been covered in 4 major financial publications. He had not connected the name Solene Voss to that company until this moment. Caius looked up from his plate. His mouth was slightly open. He did not speak. One of the guests near the middle of the table, the same man who had laughed at my father's earlier comment, was not laughing now. He was looking at me the way people look at someone they have just fundamentally recalculated. My father did not speak for a long time. I counted. It was close to 15 seconds. In all my years of knowing him, I had never seen him hold silence in front of a room, because a piece of information had caught him completely without a response. My mother was looking at her hands. I did not say anything else. I picked up my fork and continued eating. At 11 p.m., after the guests had left and the house had gone quiet, there was a knock at my bedroom door. I opened it. Caius was standing in the hallway. He looked tired, not the tiredness of a late evening, but the tiredness of someone who has been carrying something for too long. He said, "Can we talk?" I let him in. We sat down. He did not go straight to the point. He started by saying that he owed me an apology for the years of silence. He did not dress it up. He said he had seen what was happening in our family and he had chosen to stay quiet when he should not have. He said it plainly and did not ask me to respond. Then he told me why he had really come to my door. Ashford Industries was in serious trouble. Richard Ashford had made a sequence of poor investment decisions over the preceding 3 years. Debt had accumulated. 2 significant contracts had been terminated by clients. 3 major partners had pulled their commitments. The board was meeting in emergency sessions to determine whether the company could survive into the next quarter without either a capital injection or an acquisition. Without one of those 2 things, Ashford Industries would be insolvent before the end of the first quarter of the coming year. Caius was working as an independent advisor to several Ashford board members. He had access to the internal numbers. He looked at me and said, "Ashford can be acquired right now at a fair price that reflects its actual condition. The logistics infrastructure they have built over 20 years still has real value. The problem has never been the operational foundation. The problem has been leadership. If Jintra or an affiliated entity acquired Ashford and restructured it properly, you could turn it into something functional again. He stopped, then said, I am not bringing this to you because of the family connection. I am bringing it to you because it is a real opportunity and because you are the person who should be making this decision. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Richard Ashford, not with anger. I had moved past the kind of feeling that needed anger to sustain it. I thought about the 2,000 people who worked at Ashford Industries, people who had nothing to do with the decision Richard made in that conference room 5 years ago. If the company collapsed, those 2,000 people lost their jobs in a region where those jobs were not easy to replace. I called Bram the next morning. I laid out the situation. He asked specific questions about the debt structure, the asset base, the client contracts still in place, and the timeline. After 20 minutes he said, it is possible, but only if we go in to rebuild it for real, not to maintain the existing structure with a new name on the door. That was the condition I had already decided on. Over the following 6 weeks, Jintra's legal team completed the acquisition of Ashford Industries at a price that accurately reflected the company's current condition. Richard Ashford resigned from the board as part of the terms. The existing board dissolved according to the restructuring protocol. A new leadership team was installed, people Bram and I had worked with and trusted. I made one more decision about what to do with the Ashford name. I did not erase it. I used a portion of the acquired assets to establish the Ashford Foundation, a non-profit focused on workforce training and support for employees displaced by corporate restructuring. The foundation's first year of operation provided direct support to over 300 workers in the Cleveland metropolitan area. Every one of the 2,000 Ashford employees kept their job through the transition. I did not make a public announcement about my role in the acquisition for 3 months. When the story eventually came out in a business publication, a reporter asked me why I had chosen to save a company that had treated me the way Ashford had. I said the 2,000 employees had nothing to do with how I was treated, and that was the only answer that mattered. 3 months after Christmas, I drove from Detroit to Cleveland on a Saturday evening. There was no occasion, no guest list, just 4 people at the table in the house I grew up in, my father, my mother, Caius, and me. My mother cooked. The kitchen smelled the way it had smelled when I was 12 years old, and the world had not yet sorted itself into the shapes it eventually took. We sat at the table and ate without the performance that a dinner party requires. In the middle of the meal, my father put down his utensils and looked at me. He said, I was wrong, Solene, not just in Aspen. I have been wrong for longer than that. He did not explain it further. He did not list the specific moments or offer reasons. He said it and then he was quiet. I looked at him for a moment. He was older than I remembered, not just in the way that 5 years changes a person, but in the way that being forced to see yourself clearly changes a person. I said, I hear you, Dad. That was what I had. It was real. It was not a performance of forgiveness, and it was not a door closing. It was an acknowledgement that the words had been spoken and that I had received them. After dinner, my mother came to find me while Caius and my father were in the other room. She took a small gold locket from her pocket and held it out to me. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother, the one person in this family who had told me consistently and without qualification that I was capable of things that had not happened yet. My mother said, she wanted you to have this. I kept it too long. I held it in my hand. My grandmother had been gone for 4 years. I had not been home for the funeral. That was one of the things I had carried without talking about it. I did not say much. I put the locket in my pocket and kept it there for the rest of the evening. Later, Caius and I sat outside for a while. We had never been the kind of siblings who talked easily. There had always been a distance built out of years of different choices and different silences. But that evening, we sat together without needing to fill the space between us with words. Before he went back inside, he said, You did well, Solene. I did not ask him what he meant specifically. I thought it probably covered more ground than either of us had words for at that moment. On the drive back to Detroit, I was not reviewing the year or cataloguing what had been gained and lost. I was just driving, with the locket in my coat pocket, thinking about a question I had been sitting with since that night in Aspen. When you finally have everything you worked for, when the account balance is real, and the company is real, and the name people say with respect in rooms you are not even in, what is the thing you actually wanted? Was it the number? Was it the moment when your father ran out of things to say? Was it the woman at the front desk who fixed a broken projector on a Tuesday morning and did not know yet what that would eventually become? I think it was all of those things in their time. And I think the most important one was the Tuesday morning, because that was the moment before I knew how the rest of it would go, and I showed up anyway. The wounds from 5 years ago did not disappear because of one dinner. My father's apology was real, but one conversation does not undo years of what it taught me to expect. My family and I are not finished figuring out how to know each other. That is honest. That is where we are. But I drove home that night with something I had not carried in a long time. Not pride in the number, not satisfaction at the way Christmas dinner had ended, but a quieter thing, a sense that I had made choices I could stand behind, and that those choices had led me to a place I had built with my own hands. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If you had been in that dinner room, if you were the one sitting at the far end of the table while someone who was supposed to believe in you made jokes at your expense in front of 15 people, what would you have done? Would you have said something right then? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have waited the way I did and let the night speak for itself? Leave your answer below. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. There is someone in your life who has been underestimated by the people who were supposed to see them clearly, and they need to know that the story does not end at the dinner table. Like this video if you believe that where you start does not determine where you finish. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story, because I have more to tell and they all go to places that might surprise you. Share this with one person today. One is enough. Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that. Keep building what they said you could not.